Hi, I'm James West. This is Midas Letter Money. My special guests today are Eric Sprott, Chairman of Sprott Inc., and Rick Rule, President of Sprott USA. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
We happen to have an opportune moment to discuss the mess that the world is in. We've got Greece in a state of collapse, more or less. We've got gold under attack. What's going on out there? Rick, if you could maybe comment on the cause of the volatility right now.
I think the cause of the volatility right now is probably a consequence of Western economies, people in Western economies living beyond their means for 20 or 25 years and desperately attempting to continue to live beyond their means.
Okay.
There was a saying in the southern states when I grew up that goes like, when your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep becomes your downfall. And I think we've come to that point in time in history now when people don't want to live to the consequences.
Sure. So in your estimation then, is this have we gone beyond a point of no return with Greece, and is this going to catalyze a more general global crisis?
I'm personally not particularly concerned with Greece because it's such a small part of world GDP. The nervousness that I have is that Greece is analogous to other somewhat larger economies like the US, and that, from my point of view, is problematic. You're seeing strength in the US dollar, strangely. It looks like the fact that the US dollar is the most liquid lie in the world makes it a preferable lie. That's very difficult to imagine for me continuing forward.
Sure. So Eric, as you're a precious metals investor of long record, how do you see that playing out for the price of gold and silver?
Well, pretty well everything that's happening, and most of which, by the way, is not in any Economics 101 textbook. You know, whether it's a zero interest rate policy, the TARPs, the TALFs, the quantitative easings, the long-term refinance operation, the unlimited swaps from G6 central banks. All of those things are telling us that the system is out of control, that people are losing confidence, whether it's in Greek banks or Icelandic banks or Portuguese banks and the sovereigns. So every day and almost now, literally every week or two, there's some new program or some new meeting or something like that to try to keep things together. I would suggest it can't be kept together, and I use the same analogy that Rick does, except I would call it what I call a Minsky moment, who was an economist who said that when you keep expanding your economies by increasing debt, there comes a point where your economy can't deal with the debt. And Greece, of course, is the poster child today. It took on so much debt that everyone realized you can't deal with the debt, so we're going to have to write it off. And that's, I'm sure, as Rick's already said, that's the case in many countries, not just Greece. Okay,
so for gold and silver, is it bullish, bearish?
Oh, it's very bullish. I mean, I would love your listeners to think, well, if you were in Greece, what would you be doing today? You know, you're a wealthy guy, you got your money in a bank, are you going to leave it there? I don't think so. Would you? There's only certain things you can do. You can buy some other currency or buy gold. And I always hearken back to any country that's had a devaluation, whether it's Argentina, Iceland. If you had your money in gold, you wouldn't have taken the write-off on the currency. So I don't know why more people haven't gone there. It will continue to be positive for precious metals.
Okay, Rick, you sort of view the world through the eyes of a credit analyst. And so if we're looking at the credit of the United States at this point, how would you feel about buying some of that debt?
That's a great question. You know, if you assume that the government numbers are correct, and we're saving at about 3% of GDP, that means we're saving at about 3% of $14 trillion a year, $500 billion a year. You have $13 trillion in on-balance sheet liabilities and about $65 trillion in off-balance sheet liabilities. So you're trying to service, never mind pay down, $80 trillion in obligations with $500 billion a year free cash flow. That doesn't work. I am, in fact, a credit analyst, and if people ask me to talk about the U.S. federal securities and rate them the way a conventional credit analyst would, according to something resembling GAAP, they're insolvent. I have no interest in lending those guys money. Now, they point to the fact that they have extraordinary security. I'm a U.S. citizen and taxpayer. What they're referring to is me. And the fact that I am the security for that is particularly uncomfortable. A, I don't want to lend to them, and on the other side, I also don't want to pay for those obligations myself, which is seems to be what they're intending for me to do.
So how do you explain the global trend to view the U.S. dollar as a safe haven asset, given that description of what you just gave us?
Eric is probably better at that question than I am, but from the point of view of a credit analyst, the only thing I can think of to say is that the U.S. dollar is the most liquid lie in the world. The U.S. society is extremely competitive, and 30 years ago there were other countries that had mismanaged their economy to a greater degree than us and experienced more moral hazard. But as a consequence of our competitiveness, we want to win every race, including the race to the bottom. As a consequence, I guess, of the historic strength of the U.S., there is still faith in U.S. society, the U.S. economy, and the U.S. currency. And I suspect that you could say, in the context of fiat currencies, that the US dollar is the worst currency in the world except all the others. So if you compare the situation that the United States is in with, as an example the situation of Europe, perhaps we are better. That's as opposed to good. My friend Doug Casey describes the US dollar as an IOU nothing. And he says, you contrast that with the euro, which is a who owes you nothing. And I guess if that's the discussion, that the US dollar is a fairly good lie. I personally believe that gold and silver are stores of wealth and mediums of exchange that simultaneously are assets and not somebody else's liability. They're not promises to pay, which is what a currency is. They're payment. And you reach a point in time when, although they are inconvenient as mediums of exchange, you are willing to sacrifice ease for security. And I think we're there.
Historically, dollar bills were originally representative of gold being stored on behalf of the owner. And so there's a lot of discussion now suggesting that we need to return to a currency that is at least partially tied to the price of gold. So in essence, an establishment of a gold standard. And the critics say that's just not possible. How do you respond to that? Eric?
Well, James, I've always said that I think the market's already made a conclusion. The market has. And not the central banks and not the governments. The market's already decided that gold is the reserve currency. It's up by 6 times in 10 years, against all currencies. It was interesting when Ron Paul, in a hearing last week, held up a silver ounce and said, you know, this silver ounce has maintained its value. I can buy 6 times as much today as I could buy back then, but the dollar's done the exact opposite. If I had a dollar versus the silver ounce, my purchasing power has gone down considerably, whereas the silver's gone up. So the market's already made it the reserve currency, and I think, you know, going back to the dollar versus other currencies, and Rick's hit it right on, the best thing for the dollar is you get to compare yourself to other currencies. You know, if every day we said, well, you know, if we came out and said, gee, the dollar's down 500% versus gold in the last 12 years, what would everybody think? But we don't express it that way. It's always, it's up versus the yen or down versus this, and all these currencies are depreciating together.
Sure, so but do you see gold as a viable option, as a standard, sort of regulated into the monetary system to create some kind of reality as opposed to the illusion that all this debt has become?
Well, I think if you took all the currencies in the world to some value, now the some value may have to be cut back because it's not really backed by anything, but I think you could make gold a reserve currency if the price was $5,000 or $10,000. There would be enough gold in the world to back the currency, but it's just a matter of getting up to that price. And you know, we've gone a long way to getting there. I mean, we were at $250 12 years ago. Today we're at $1,700. Lots of people expect it to be north of 2,000 before the end of this year. And you know, you give it a few more years, we might get to that value where it could replace currency, depending on how much money they print. Unfortunately, the money printing is almost going faster than, the price of gold's going up.
Sure. Okay, so throughout my life, I've noticed that we're always talking about the price of the dollar versus the euro, the price of this versus that, and always included in that is the price of everything versus an ounce of gold. And so is it not a true statement that gold has always been the standard by which other currencies are measured for 5,000 years and is in fact the only gold standard?
Well, it's true that that's been the case, except very few people want to refer to it that way. I mean, those of us in the gold community refer to it that way, but you're not going to have the central bank suggest that gold is a currency. In fact, I think Chairman Bernanke was asked that, you know, what is gold? And he gave some flippant answer that it certainly didn't include it as a currency, but we know it has been. We know it with all the events going on in the world today, it will probably come back as a currency again.
Okay. Now, Rick, you're sort of renowned for being opportunistic and being where investors are not yet, and thereby turning opportunities into profits. So given this environment, where is the opportunity now for investors to be that is yet to deliver its value?
I think there's a reasonably large number of opportunities. One opportunity is a defensive opportunity, which is to buy bullion. Buy gold, buy silver, buy platinum. I ask people not to think about buying them to make money, but rather buy them to preserve purchasing power. And I think preserving purchasing power on a going forward basis is a wonderful opportunity. I think people need to concentrate on that first. So first things first, I think bullion is relatively attractive. I hope I don't make a bunch of money on my bullion. Bullion traditionally has been catastrophe insurance. And I would prefer not to experience a catastrophe, but I feel better owning it. The second thing is, and this is lovely for me personally, the gold and silver equities have greatly underperformed the bullion. I was in the embarrassing position in 2010 to be way underweight gold and silver equities because I thought they were expensive. The market took care of that, which is very convenient. So we have a set of circumstances now where the institutional trade, the momentum trade, is out of gold and silver equities and maybe into the bullion. From my point of view, the market has made the gold and silver equities relatively more attractive, which is very nice from my point of view. I would say a third set of circumstances that I am attracted to are energy markets generally. I'm attracted to uranium because I think the utility of uranium is very high to users. I think worldwide energy consumption of all types is going up and worldwide supply of energy is in trouble. I think conventional oil, or if you have a sense of humor for a contrarian activity and some patience, natural gas are also attractive. I see really truly a plethora of opportunities in the resource sector. I would caution your listeners that these opportunities will take courage and patience because I think that we're headed into a period of volatility in financial markets that's absolutely unprecedented.
Okay, so as an investor then, you've got to learn to tune out the noise. Don't look at the day-to-day fluctuations. You've got to keep your eyes on the asset and stick with it. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, and I think you have to accustom yourself to volatility. You have to either use volatility or be used by volatility. Most speculators, for some reason, don't mind upside volatility. It reinforces their existing, sort of orientation, but they don't like the downside part. Really what volatility is a sort of a staccato, a series of 30% off sales. And if you're looking to increase your exposure to an asset class and you have faith in the asset class, volatility should be a good thing. But it takes a lot of experience and a lot of discipline to put that into practice. Fortunately, being in the resource business for 30 years, for better or for worse, I've experienced a lot of volatility. And for me, it goes with the territory. But it's more difficult for people who actually have a life.
Okay. So, Eric, where do you see the opportunities in terms of precious metals, explorers, mid-tier producers, large-cap producers? Where's the sweet spot for you?
Okay. Well, lately I've been leaning towards the silver sector. And the reason I lean towards the silver sector is I watch what people do with their money. And when I look at the U.S. mint sales, for example, people are buying 50 times more silver in physical volume than gold. When we did the recent issue of our silver trust, we raised $350 million roughly. When we did our gold trust, we raised $330. We bought 50 times more silver than we did gold in physical ounces. The availability of silver for investment vis-a-vis gold is about 7 to 1. So we can't have people continue to buy at these kinds of ratios and not have the price go up. And we've talked before about what goes on in the silver markets, which I find rather disturbing, that the price plunges all of a sudden because all this paper silver comes for sale. But I focus on the physical part, and if the physical demand stays there, if, for example, some of these silver producers decide to keep their cash, rather than have it in cash, have it in silver, I think big things can happen to silver going forward. So I'm a big bull on silver, the bullion, and I'm a big bull on silver stocks.
Okay, well, gentlemen, that's an interesting conversation. As usual, I'd like to thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
If you'd like to learn more about the Sprott Group of companies, visit Sprott.com. And if you'd like to learn more about companies like Sprott, visit MidasLetter.com. I'm James West, and this is Midas Letter Money.